Hey everybody, how are you doing? My name's James Beswick and I'm a Principal Developer Advocate here in the AWS Serverless team. And today we're talking about step functions. We've got some demos for you. We'll be taking away questions and showing you all the new cool features that the service is releasing. And I've got two special guests with me today. We've got Dan, who's a PM, and we've got Pooya, who's an SDE, and they know literally everything there is to know about step functions. So welcome to Serverless Office Hours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So before we get started, Dan, tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do in the team.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a principal product manager for the Step Functions team, and basically what I do is I engage with customers. So obviously, customer is number one at AWS. One of our core and the first leadership principle is customer obsession. So we obsess over kind of building the things that the customers need to be successful, and so I kind of bring a lot of the voice of the customer back to the team, and then I work on kind of proposals for new products that we build and new features, and then I work on launching them and kind of taking them out to customers. So that's my main role, and I personally work very closely with our kind of we call it our workflow experience team. So this is a group. It's actually two teams focused on kind of our tooling designed for developers, as well as like our consoles. For like simple workflow and step functions, and so kind of our charter there is to maintain all of the developer tooling and kind of user experiences for these two services.
Great. And Pooya, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm senior software engineer in workflow experience team. As Dan mentioned, workflow experience team is working to improve the developer experience for both simple workflow and step function. I'm part of the console team, and we are trying to improve the console and give a better way for developer to interact with simple workflow and step functions.
Great. So before we get into the demo part of today, and anybody watching can ask questions, we'll pick them up here and put them out to the team. I just wanted to ask you, Dan, so it's been a crazy year for step functions. Like the sheer number of releases and things happening in the servers has just been extraordinary. And I've been using step functions for a long time, and I've never seen so much development happening as in the last few months. So how did this all come about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, basically, when I joined AWS, I was kind of given the charter of like we were building a new team that was be focused on the experience for step functions, and so kind of like after I joined, we worked on like a lot of new like developer tooling and things like that, and where we ended up was a lot of customers kept asking us or suggesting to us is like, hey, have you ever thought about building, say, a visual experience for step functions where you could kind of build and compose workflows, and I used to get a lot of feedback. So I had questions in my mind about like, okay, so do developers really want an experience that is visual, where you can kind of like drag and drop and compose workflows, or do developers typically prefer to just be off in the code? And the answer was actually surprisingly both. And so my job became like convincing everyone that this was the right thing to do, that we needed to invest a lot more in our like visual experiences and our visual builder, etc. So that's where like we ended up building a workflow studio, and this just yesterday. So we've been kind of continuing to invest in and kind of enhance our console experience, and we know that a lot of customers, I mean, the number one reason that developers and customers come to our console is actually to use our operator experience, like to run, not necessarily to run the workflows, but to look at the workflow executions, to look at like what passed, what failed, what happened, and debug their executions. And so it's been clear for a while that we needed to kind of rework on that experience. So I was pleased to announce yesterday the launch of our new experience for viewing and debugging workflow executions. So the new execution details page. And so that's been kind of that culmination of like a lot of customer feedback and a bunch of time by Pooya and the team to build a kind of a new experience.
Yeah. So before we get into that, just one question I've seen from a viewer. Any plans on having the visual tool to generate SAM or CDK snippets?
Mm-hmm. No, that's a fantastic question, and we are. So one of the things that also surprised me was when I had a recent or some calls with like customers that I know use, or developers that use the CDK a lot, and they actually had an ask for us, which was, "Hey, can you make Workflow Studio work really well with the CDK and with SAM?" And so that's been interesting because, yeah, there definitely is a desire from very experienced developers to say build visually and prototype quickly in the visual tool, and then have an easy way to transfer that over into the CDK. And so you can actually import a workflow definition into the CDK experience right now, but there's a lot more that we need to do. And so as PMs and kind of the team, we're looking at what the next steps are for kind of integrating with the CDK and kind of like having a really nice path all the way from like Visual Studio or Workflow Studio over into production.
Yeah. And you've actually got one fan here saying definitely building state machines with the Workflow Studio is better than writing the JSON state machine. Kudos to the team. So thanks very much, Zach, for saying that. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's take a look at the demo and show everybody what you've got.
Sure. So I want to show some key changes in the new execution detail page. And sometimes to show you the difference, I will compare it with the old one. So to start, I want to focus on seeing the error. One of the use case for execution detail page is when your state machine or execution is failing. And customers are coming to the page and trying to open the execution, and the first thing they need to see is the error message right away. As you noticed, we have new section in the page, and we are directly showing the error, and we are showing which step has the error and also the cause of the error. In addition to this error and cause, we have a button to go and open the step detail. So in the detail section, you will right away see the step that failed, the input, output, detail, and everything related to the failed step. Let me open the old page and see how the old page is doing something similar. So if I go and open the same thing, you see the failed event, but to see the error message, you need to go to the events. If there are too many events, you need to load more and find the error message. It's not trivial. It's not easy. Sometimes it's not even possible. So that's the first change we did in this page based on the feedback we got from the customer. It's very hard to find the error, and now we are doing it right away. We are showing the error message. The next example I want to show is when you have very big events. So I create another state machine that has 25,000 events. And as you see, we are still loading the data, but right away we are showing the error message. So you can see the execution failed because we reached 25,000 event limit. As you see, still we are loading all the events behind the scene, but we are not waiting for getting the last event and show the error message. The next part I want to focus is the table view or transition. Let me go back to the old page again. So in the old page, we have a graph, and then we have the events. For any state transition, we have multiple events. And these events are ordered by ID. And it's very hard to connect or link these events together. For example, we have a Lambda function here, get fruit price. And if I want to find the events related to get fruit price. I can come here, look for them, and here I'm seeing lots of events for example, get list of fruits. But as you see, there are too many events. Some of them are for different iteration, and they're not connected to each other. So it's not easy to find which of these events is related to another one. If I open this, you see this one has some data. So maybe you can guess and connect them together, but it's not easy. In the new one, instead of showing events, we change it to transition or what happened to any steps. So as you see here, instead of showing all the events, we have two steps, parent step here. Let me go to the graph again and show you. So we have loop over stores here and loop over store fruit price here. Two steps as parent. And here you can see these two steps, type of them, and what happened to them, succeed. And if I open them, as you see for map and parallel step, we are showing a tree view, so you can find all the child states inside. So we have different iteration, and if I open the iteration, you see the steps inside it, and if you have more nested parallel or map step inside it, you can go drill down and find all the data inside this. The other change in this transition view is it's not for one event. We have multiple events for each step. So we have duration. It's not only one event. It's a start, some events in between, and then the end event. So we have duration for each event. And also, we are showing this in a timeline view. And by timeline view, you have a good sense of timeline or the duration or time and compare steps based on time. For example, here we can see the 80% of the time in this state machine is spent on the first step and the rest for the next step. If I open and expand the first one, you can compare different iterations inside this map, and you can see which one take more time. I have a Lambda function here with retry, and as you see here with these small dots, or here in the timeline, it failed 2 times, 2 red line, and then finally succeeded. And you can see the time between the retries, so you have a good sense of backup time, especially if it's exponential. And the next change is filter. You can easily filter the rows or data you see here based on different attributes: name, type, status, duration, even anything that has retry, or even input and output. Let me show you one example for input and output. So I am passing some name to this state machine execution. They are random name for stores. So let me see, for example, for this pita pad, where this data exists and where I can find it. So I'm coming to this filter. I am looking for any input that contains pita pad. And right away, you can see you have this data here. Let me add something else, for example, in the output. So any output that also contains pita pan, and now I want to change it to OR. Any state transition that include pita pan as input or output. You can also filter by date range, and it's especially important if you have a long-running state machine. And it's very hard to create one table that fits all the use cases. So we added a reference or setting to this table. So you can change the columns you want to see here. You can even show retries or remove retries. You can select how you want to see the parents, and do you want to click on the rows or only on the radio button. So everything in this table is customizable. The other thing I want to mention is everything you are doing in this page, we are remembering this. So if you change the column width, you change which column to show, we are remembering this, and next time you open this page, you see the same settings. Same for resizing. For example, if I resize the size of this table, next time we remember this for you. The next part I want to go and spend time on it is the details. So if you open or select any of this estate, you will see the detail in the this panel. And we added some new data to selected estate. To begin with, one thing we find out based on the feedbacks, especially the recent feedback after we launched this, is link to resource is the most used feature in this page. Customers are coming here and they're expecting to have an easy way to go to other resources and start debugging or see what's happening there. So when you're clicking and selecting any step, right away you see links to resources in the top. You see the name of the steps, and then you have some tabs. The first tab here is input and output, and you can see the input and output of your step. We also added advanced view. By advanced view, you have input and output, and also any data flow you have. What is your input? What is your parameter? What is your task input? What is the result of your task? And what is your result selector, result path, output path, and finally output. So you can see how your data changed from input to output right away in this view. We have detail. It shows more data about your selected step. For example, if I choose map, you see some iteration overview, how much time you spend here. For resource, you have heartbeat or timeout in second. And then we have this definition. This definition is not the whole state machine definition. And instead of that, we are showing the definition for the selected step. So if I go and select Lambda function, you see the definition for Lambda function. So it's very easy to find the portion of the definition that you are interested in. For example, you have a Lambda function and your retry is not working. So you want to see what is your definition here, how you can improve it. So you see it right away. And the next part is, as I mentioned before, this transition table is based on events. We are processing the events to draw and prepare this table for you. And behind the scene, we have events. So when you open the events, you see all related events to these steps. You don't need to go and see all the events and manually try to find the related events to your task. We are only filtering and showing the events that is important for you. Some of the tabs are visible when you have data. For example, if you have a Lambda that has retry, then we are showing a retry tab for you. And as you see here, this Lambda task has initial attempts, and then we retry twice until it succeeds. And for any attempt, you can see the error reason right away here. You don't need to go and dig in the events to find this data. Next part is graph. The graph doesn't have too much change, but there are some small changes that can help improve the debugging. The first one is when you have nested parents or map or parallel state, we are giving an easier way to go and choose iteration. So here, this get fruit price is inside two map. So the first map is loop over stores, and the second map is loop over fruits. As you see, you can choose which iteration for loop over store, and which iteration for loop over fruits you want to choose, and look at the Lambda function in it. So I can change this iteration and right away see the input, output, or any other detail about these steps. Right now we are showing 2, but if you have a complex state machine with 10 map or parallel nested states inside each other, we are showing all the necessary steps here, so you can iterate between them, go and choose separate or different iteration. Some small other minor changes. We are showing the title for map and parallel state. And also we added a full scale. So if you have something very big, you need real estate to go and zoom and find the detail, you can see your graph in full scale. I almost cover all the big changes. So there are some small change here I want to mention. A state transition is one of them. It's very hard in the old page to see how many state transition you have. Also, it's not easy to go and call any API in a state machine to get a state transition. So we are showing the state transition. It's especially important because the cost for execution is based on the state transition. And also, we are showing the duration here. The duration was, so in the previous version, the only way was to calculate it yourself based on the start and end time. And now we are showing the duration right away. And we have count of events. So I think I didn't mention these events because we had event table before. We are keeping the same event table. We add filter and date filter to it. We add pagination, and also we are showing all the events, no matter how many you have, so there is no need for load more. And the last one I want to mention is export. So by this export button, you can get the same data, every event, any state transition, any definition you have for this execution inside the JSON file. And we are also giving a way to import it back and visualize this data. It's not launched yet, but we are launching it very soon. I think that's it. That's the most important feature changes in this page. If you want to go deeper and look at any part in deeper, I can explain more.
Yeah, great. That's an awesome demo. Thanks so much, Pooya. I mean, it's amazing to me just how much has changed here, because you keep iterating on the improvements that are in the UI already. So my first question to you is, how do you decide what you're going to change in these pages?
So one thing that I like a lot about Amazon is customer obsession. Mm-hmm. And for me, I never can create something that is useful for customer unless it comes from the customer. And the first trigger to start this project was based on how many feedback we had from the customers. So we look at all the feedback we had, and we saw the biggest opportunity for us is to address all the missing feature and all the bugs we have in the execution detail page. So we decided to work on this. And when we start the project and when we were working on the project, we try to get feedback and iterate over the feedback we are getting from the customers. And from the last week, when we start launching this, we are still getting feedbacks, lots of feedbacks, and we are going through all the feedbacks, every one of them. And we are trying to find which area we missed, which area we have bugs or sharp edges to address. And everything you see here, any iteration you see, any incremental iteration is coming from the customer feedback. And I also want to mention that one of the difference between this page and the old page is this page is much easier for us to iterate and incrementally add new feature. And nobody like in our team to keep this new page forever. And that's the beginning for us. And we are trying to iterate fast over this.
might just also mention, thanks for what we heard from customers in terms of like the top 3 things that like customers felt that it'd be important for us to focus on based upon the feedback. So after going, as Pooya mentioned, after going through like hundreds of feedback items, we ended up settling on like the 3 most important things being like basically the ability to like rapidly root cause issues. And so that's why like we've, as Pooya showed, like we've started to kind of show the reason for the failure. We had a lot of feedback asking for like, can I reverse sort all of the events so I can get to the last one first. So like we've made that possible. We've also made it possible to like, we also highlight the reason for the failure, make it possible to like filter through all the events. And so we've kind of gone above and beyond in kind of answering that request, or at least attempted to. So, and we've already had a feedback from customers that it's greatly or dramatically improved the time to kind of debug and resolve issues. Another big one was we moved over from, so obviously the service is based on events. Like we don't actually have the concept of state transitions really in the back end of the service. It's all kind of focused on like an event sourcing style where like basically state is a culmination of kind of a series of events that describe exactly what happened. So it's really helpful to give a lot of visibility into those events, but we find that a lot of developers think of it in terms of like state transitions. So we started to move over from being purely kind of event focused to also building this table view that Pooya has that focuses on kind of the states and the states transitions, and then using that as a way to like drill down to the events, drill down to like the logs from the task that was called, or like the task definition and things like that. So moving from a event-centric view to like a state-centric view was kind of a key change, although we still give access, we still have that event view for those that find that is kind of the most efficient way to debug. The third one was making the error handling really visible. So the way that we handle errors. And so you saw what Pooya showed, how there's like that little timeline that shows like basically how long things take, but if they were called multiple times, as well as the boxes where it shows like red, green shows like the number of retries. And we're trying to make we didn't want to, it's a fine balance between kind of over indexing on the error handling. We didn't want to over index on it, because like if something ultimately is successful, then basically that's what we believe customers are most interested in seeing. But it is helpful to see like where errors were caught and handled. And if that's happening quite frequently, then that might be something you want to like dive into and debug a little bit. So those were some of the top areas that we focused on as we built up this experience.
Yeah, and so to everybody who's watching, this is one of those services where I'd say if you see that feedback button at the very top of the page, click that and send that to the team. They do read absolutely every single piece of feedback. And this team is super active in terms of making improvements. So as you're using this tool or this service, if you think of anything at all, just hit the button and let the team know. But I'll show a couple of the questions that have come in while you were doing the demo. So first one is from Mark. Is it a good idea to use step functions to implement an outbound webhook service? What do you think about that?
So it's this is something that where we do get asks kind of coming in related to so yeah, like a lot of people could use step functions for that. In terms of like making calls, we do have a lot of requests in from customers looking to make calls to like HTTP endpoints, etc. And it's not something we support directly yet, but we do support via Lambda. And we have a lot of customers doing that to like making calls to external services using Lambda today. But I don't know, James or Pooya, if you have some other comments on that one.
I think it depends, doesn't it? Because there's lots of different ways of calling an outbound webhook service. You know, EventBridge has some really useful features with API destinations. If you're doing lots of processing on the information going out, I could see step functions being useful with that too. But if you're just blindly putting data out somewhere, then maybe not. So I think it just depends on what you're implementing.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
We've got another one here. So sorry if you've talked about this before. Is the graphical execution history available for synchronous express workflows?
So the answer to that is not yet. We don't. So the way that Express Workflows was designed was there was a focus on speed and cost. And so when you design the workflow, you can, using like Express Workflows, you can see the visualization. But when you execute it, we don't actually store that data in the service, so it's not available to generate the execution graph. We have a couple of options there. So you do have the option of sending all of that data to CloudWatch logs and storing it there. And so we have received quite a bit of feedback on this. And so this is something that we're, as like the PMs, are kind of actively exploring about what the best way to do this is. And there's a few options on our plate. One is we could visualize the workflow from the logs if you choose to send the data to CloudWatch, or the execution history to CloudWatch logs. We also are talking about like at additional cost, does it make sense to like store more in our service, or maybe just store like the end result for the workflow execution in the service. So we're exploring a few different angles there. We are being attentive to the customer feedback on that front, and that's something that we hope to have an answer to over time.
Great. Can we share the execution results to other developers, more like testing the step functions on prod if something's wrong, and you can share it to other devs and they can recreate the same execution on dev and staging environments?
So I guess the question there would be like, what exactly are you looking for? So if I'm interpreting this correctly, like if we were to have say an export button, so the way I might visualize this would be like, say you're on the execution details page and you had an export button, and you were able to say export that experience and share it with something else. I'm kind of curious if that would address this need. That is something that we've discussed before, and so very interested in customer feedback if you find that that would be something that would be helpful. It sounds like in this case perhaps that would be
great. Yeah, we had a lot of comments saying these features look really interesting, so thanks for those. And also the metrics of execution time and time taken being really helpful. So here's one, are there any technical limitations preventing Express workflow support?
So are there technical limitations? So basically it comes down to the data so the answer is yes, in a sense. So when we built Express Workflows, there was a focus on cost and speed, and we made decisions to not, like we don't store. The reason we can visualize the execution history for the standard workflow is because we store all of that in our service itself, right? So we have a history, we store all of the events, and we store them for 90 days, and we're able to bring them back and kind of rebuild that execution graph for you. For the Express Workflows, the reality is we don't store the data in the service. If we were to do that, it would probably there would be additional trade-offs that we would need to look at. And so I guess we'd be interested to hear customer feedback on, like, is that something that you would prefer and be willing to kind of cover to like if the costs were to go up a little to accommodate that, is that something that would be amenable to you? The other option is for us to kind of pull that data in from CloudWatch logs when it is sent there and visualize it. And maybe there's like other options, such as like we could only store and forward on the data when there's a failed execution and visualize that. So we're exploring different options. Today, there are technical limitations that stop us from doing it. However, there are different options that we're looking at as a way to solve that.
Great. I think you'll like this one, Dan. Can I debug step functions locally? And if so, how?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a local runner for step functions. And earlier in the year, we basically invested some more in that and launched an updated version of it that allows you to basically test your state machine execution. So you can mock the responses from service integrations. Perhaps we can share a link to the documentation that shows you how to pull that down. But basically, you can bring down a local runner. It's either a Java jar file or a Docker container. you can set it up and run it, and then you can mock the responses from your service integrations. And we support like in mocking the response from basically all of the service integrations that we support through the AWS SDK. So the 220 plus services and 10,000 API actions, all of those can be mocked, and you can choose whether to like mock or call a service. So you can do all of that using the local runner. And you can also so there's some external kind of unit testing frameworks that people have been working on as well, and kind of helper tools that work with the local runner. And you could take a look at some of those if you want to build a unit testing experience around it.
Yep, and I pasted a link down there. So if you want to learn more about that, you can follow that link. It's got links to documentation and other things. And just actually a question on that. So you talk a lot about SDK integrations and API actions. What are the differences between the two?
Yeah, so we have two types of service integrations. So we have we have our original service integrations, which are kind of integrations that we've built into the service, where we support the ability to call like synchronously, asynchronously, and using the callback pattern. And so like typically, so like let me give you a couple of examples. So we support like batch or glue, and you have choices about how you invoke them. So you can choose to say run a glue job, and we will handle the polling under the hood for these more advanced service integrations, so that like these customized service integrations, so that when that glue job finishes, then you will like continue the workflow. You can also say make calls out to containers using the task token, where you pass the task token in, and when there's a call made back to Step Functions using the Send Task Success API, we will continue the workflow. When it comes to the AWS SDK integrations, it's a little more bare bones. So you can call any API, and there's the request response pattern where you just make the call and get the response, or you can, if this other service supports it, you can pass in the task token. And when that round trips back to Step Functions, the workflow will continue. If you want to call things synchronously, you basically need to build your own polling loop for those. So let's say that you're calling like Textract and you want to wait for the job to finish. There's typically describe APIs that you can build into your workflow that you can call directly, and then you can basically like loop and build a poller right into your workflow that will continue when the job is complete. So basically the level of support is the main difference. I don't know if Pooya or James, if there's anything you want to add there.
I want to add that in the new execution detail page, we have a feature that we want to launch that to support these universal integrations. So right now, and also in the old page, if you have a resource that is not, it's a USI, we are not giving you a link to that resource. And that's one of the areas we are working on to improve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point, Pooya. We often hear customer requests for like, hey, can you have a drill down link to either the logs or the definition of the resource? And so that is, we do have the intention over time to build in more and more of those types of links into the service.
Great. So is reproducing production issues an appropriate use case for import and export? So you'd export the problematic run from production, import to a local Step Functions, and troubleshoot, or are there better ways besides looking at the logs?
So for import and export, we have 3 use cases right now. Mm-hmm. One use case is for storing this data. You want to export it and keep it for yourself and look it later, or share it with someone else to look at it. The other use case, if you want, maybe I can share my screen again.
Yeah.
So we didn't launch it right now, but we are launching it very soon. We are giving a way to import it back. So you can choose your exported file, and you can see the exact same page without even being in production. So you can locally, or even someone else can look at the same exact execution, the whole data, the graph, the table view, the event view, all the detail. So that's another use case for export. And the third one is if you have some issues and you want to open a ticket with a Step Function, sending this exported file is giving us a very good way to debug and find and reproduce the issue right away.
Yeah, that's really interesting actually for customers, because often people don't realize we don't have much insight into what you're doing in your environment. So if you have a problem, our support people often don't have much to go on. So that's really helpful.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a little prototype of a feature that we've built internally, and yeah, very interested in customer feedback on that one if that's something that you find helpful.
Okay, let me see what other questions we've got here. Let's see, there's one here. Debugging locally is good to check the flow, but service integration based debug is best over the cloud. What are your thoughts about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, you're never going to be able to reproduce the cloud environment locally. And I think like the local runner is best for like unit testing, but integration testing with other services is best done in the cloud. And I know we have, James, I don't know if you want to comment on the support that was launched through SAM for kind of cloud-based integration testing.
Yeah, I can paste the link on that too. I mean, it's definitely something we're bringing closer and closer, but again, I think it depends on your workload. That often debugging locally can work well for certain types, whereas cloud integration, as you get more complete integrations with different microservices in a larger project, I think becomes a must. But depending on what you need, we've got different tools available.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the local testing, like what we heard from customers was basically there's three things that customers, like developers, were looking to do. So one was to like test all of the error handling logic within their state machines. And obviously it's helpful to be able to mock the responses to make that work. But yeah, test all of the error handling logic. Try to get like coverage to make sure that it's possible to hit every state. So like the decision logic that was in the workflow, make sure that that could all be exercised. And the third one was the error handling logic. So the ability to trigger. It may be hard in a production environment to trigger all of the errors. And so in a unit testing environment, you can make sure that you test all of the error handling for your state machine. However, when it comes to like testing with other services, it's you can set up the local runner to work with like select other like local experiences, but definitely the cloud environment is the best way to test with other services in production, or as you move towards production.
So next question. So can we refer to state input in the results selector? The use case is that when we want to pass data from the previous state to the next state without passing through the Lambda function in the current state.
Do you want to take that one, Pooya?
Not sure about this, but looks like it's very similar to use case for having a global context or a storage. Something that you want to not send it step by step and access it in all states.
Yeah, I mean, you can refer, so state input from the result selector. Yeah, I mean, you can refer to the context object, obviously, and there are ways to so the use case is when we want to pass data from the previous state to the next state without passing through Lambda function in the current state. And so yeah, there are ways to pass the input to the state through to the output and basically bypassing the Lambda function. So yeah, the docs have a fair bit of description about how the things like the result selector work and all of the input and output path processing. And so yeah, you can definitely totally bypass the service integration and pass that through to the state output and kind of recombine. So you can choose how you recombine kind of the state input and the output from the service integration before you pass it on to the next step. I'm not sure if I got the question exactly, but that's basically my response based on how I interpreted it.
Yeah, Alpaco's just commented, isn't there a simple pass task that does this?
But looks like we want to do some task in the Lambda, but the task we are running in the Lambda, we don't want to apply the output of it to our data or pass it to the next step. So maybe I'm thinking maybe a parallel step. Parallel step is the best way to do this. You can have one branch that is processing your data like a simple past task that is sending your data, and another branch that is not doing the input-output processing for you, but running your tasks.
Yes.
So going back to import-export, so could you make an option to push that export through SNS?
This would be the export of the execution history.
Yeah.
So this
Really
execution, the export we have here is a console feature.
Mm-hmm.
Behind the scene, we have APIs that are doing the same thing. So you can have an API to get execution history. We have API that gives you the state machine for that execution. So we have all these APIs. If you want, you can call them even inside your state machine, and you can get the data from these APIs and then even pass to SNS.
Great. And I think I mentioned earlier that there have been so many launches for step functions in the last 12 months that obviously it can be difficult to keep up with a lot of the things that are happening. So I wanted to share a link with everybody. If you go to this link, this is where you can pull a complete list of everything that's being released. And so you can see in the last few months of what the service has been putting out. But truly, there's just been an enormous amount. And I also wanted just to rewind a little bit and talk about Workflow Studio, because a lot of people still haven't seen this. But if you've not yet tried this, this is a phenomenal way to build your applications from scratch. So a lot of people either love or hate ASL, but you can use the Workflow Studio to build this visually and then export your ASL. So it might be worth just having a quick look here just to show everybody if you've not seen this. It's just an incredible bit of UI that Ben on my team and I use a lot, but it makes it incredibly easy to just snap different services into place and use flow controls to build applications incredibly quickly. So I think in terms of building serverless applications, I'm starting to believe this is the first place I would start when I'm building things.
Yeah, no, this visual experience basically is paired one-to-one with the code. So like if basically as you're dragging and dropping things, we're generating the code under the hood in the Amazon States language, and you may find kind of a good balance between as you use this between kind of building up a prototype for your workflow, then filling in all of the resources, and then like you can always edit the definition as well if you so choose to, and then bring it into your infrastructure as code, the definition into your infrastructure as code experience, and take it into production. But yeah, it's basically we chose, when we designed this, our goal was to kind of expose everything that was in the Amazon States language in a visual or form way. So basically everything that you can do in the Amazon States language comes through here in some form or another, but it's far easier to discover the capabilities through this interface.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things we've just released in the DA team is a workshop that goes with Serverless Espresso. So if you've not heard of Serverless Espresso, this was a live coffee bar ordering system we built for reInvent. And the whole thing is built using Workflow Studio. And so now we've launched a workshop where you can go through step by step and actually build your own coffee ordering service. So I'll put the link here. If you go there, it's a free workshop. You can just deploy it in your own account and really get to grips with how this new UI works.
Can you remind me, James? So what? How much does it cost a day to run the Serverless Espresso?
Yeah, so that's actually one of my items I wanted to chat to you about was cost, because we built Serverless Espresso where we're doing about 1,000 orders a day. So the way it's set up, one customer can order 1 cup of coffee. So it's 1,000 people come to the booth, download an app, go through a mobile app, which publishes to 2 other apps. And there's these workflows in between that publish events using EventBridge. And so there's lots of services being used here. And their entire cost of running this is less than $1 a day for 1,000 customers. And I think the step functions cost, when I checked it, was under 5 cents or thereabouts. So in terms of the amount of custom code this removed for us, we built version 1 of Serverless Espresso with Lambda, and we built version 2 using step functions. And it pulled out about 90% of our custom code. So this very, very low cost of running, I think, is a great, it's an incredibly cheap way to run serverless apps, especially when you consider the cost of developers and the cost of time to market issues.
Mm-hmm. And the other pretty amazing thing is like with the whole kind of serverless mantra, like your cost is directly comparable to kind of your key metric, which is, in this case, is like coffee served, right? So like the cost of your of the compute is basically while you are making, well, you don't make money serving these cups, you're giving it away for free. but if it was a real life experience, the compute cost would be directly proportional to kind of the key metric there, which is like coffee served.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you build lots of these workflows before you'd made a lot of these changes. Many of the steps were invoking Lambda functions that did fairly basic things. You might have a Lambda function to just get something from a DynamoDB table and passes the result on. And so you're invoking a Lambda function that has its own cost. Now with these direct service integrations, the step itself does the work. And so this actually is an interesting change in the cost of the application. Now, Lambda, of course, is still incredibly cheap to run. You have a million invocations for 20 cents and some other costs, but it's still very inexpensive. But I think this actually is a lot simpler when you don't need to have that Lambda function. It makes it much simpler to see what your application is doing, share your code with teams, and also make changes on the fly as well. So Ben and I, when we built Serverless RSO, we acted like two separate development teams where I didn't tell him much about what I was doing and he didn't know either. We just passed this back and forth. And we learned a lot about how you could use this approach for building these sorts of applications very quickly.
Mm-hmm. That's neat. Yeah, it kind of reminds me like one of the one anecdote. So after I started, I was about a month in to AWS, and I was down in Seattle talking with one of our serverless heroes, and he kind of explained to me that the way that I tell everyone on my team about step functions is I basically tell them like this is your main function for the cloud, right? Except it's a visual main function, but it basically and that's now like far more true with the AWS SDK integration and the ability to call like virtually any AWS API that's available through the AWS SDK. Is this like really becomes your kind of main function for the cloud that can just sequence all of your calls and call synchronously, asynchronously, whatever you need.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when we've been running this event in production, where we've taken it to multiple summits and had thousands of customers, we found this very easy to identify when there are problems. We've had workflows fail because we've hit certain limits and regions we've not set properly. And when that happens in production, minutes really count. We're trying to find exactly where the error is. And in the cases where we've had problems, we're able to diagnose them extremely quickly this way. So we're big believers in the way of building applications using this just to get things moving quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, yeah, one of our main goals as a service is to be kind of the easiest way to build a distributed application by just handling a lot of the like cross service calls and errors and faults and things like that you would have to handle on your own if you didn't have something like step functions.
Yeah. So Zach asks, is there any way to invoke a step functions execution from an app sync mutation apart from going through a Lambda function?
I'm not aware of a way to do it today other than going through a Lambda function.
Yeah, I can't think of any way either. If something, Event Bridge may be an option, but I'm guessing you probably have to use a Lambda function in any case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can definitely trigger a workflow. I mean, a lot of our workflows are either triggered through Lambda or through Event Bridge. Between those two. Yeah,
I'm going to ask you about that in just a second, but Zach also says 200 plus integrations has definitely made it a great way to migrate from Lambda to step functions based workflows, and that's certainly something that we're seeing a lot of customers using this for. But going back to the Event Bridge question, so we're starting to see a really interesting development pattern emerge here where you can use step functions with Event Bridge for developing applications. And certainly just from our own experience of building, it's become a really simple way of building microservice-based apps where the choreography and orchestration can be handled by these two services very easily. What are your thoughts of seeing this emerging pattern given how well these services fit together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Like event-driven applications, like we believe that like step functions plays a key role in building an event-driven application, and that role is like we found that in some cases customers start building applications say entirely based upon events, and they end up they end up like trying to use events to describe things that are truly processes, like that are like a sequence of a sequence of steps that happen, and there's like dependencies between the steps, and there's things that you want to do in parallel, etc. And you want to know for sure that like every transaction completes, and you want like idempotency, etc. And so the best way to build a lot of these applications is to use actually a mix of like of events and workflows, where you're kind of like going across a contextual boundary. You may use events, but within kind of the bounded context of a microservice, maybe you would use a workflow to kind of describe all of the to kind of describe the processes. And then when you do that, so like kind of lay out all these steps all these steps into a workflow, then you get all of the other things that Step Functions offers, such as the ability to kind of like track them through to completion, visualize them, get the logs, etc., all in one place.
Actually, just a couple of comments came in. So actually on that question about invoking Step Functions from AppSync, apparently you can. And Father Goblin has also found a pattern on serverless land that does this too. So that's very interesting. I have to have a look at that. I wasn't aware that was available. So that's a good find.
Yes. We even have a challenge to keep up with everything.
Yeah. We do. People at AWS don't know everything. We're just trying to figure it all out as the best we can. But yeah, that pretty much brings us up to the end of our time today. So I'd really like to thank Dan and Pooya for joining us and showing us the demo and talking through all of these questions. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about serverless, go to serverlessland.com, where we keep all of our blogs, videos, patterns, and other information to help you learn about building serverless apps. And you can also reach out to the DA team on Twitter, LinkedIn, email, or any other channel that you prefer. Otherwise, thanks very much for joining us, and tune in again next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.